It's a free-for-all. You know, I always say, if you want to commit a crime and get away with it, move to Seattle.
Tonight, the Spotlight is searching for answers. New laws in our state are meant to stop police brutality.
I know I can't breathe. I can't breathe. You're talking.
Our goal really was to increase accountability, reduce police violence, and also have de-escalation the center of police work.
But did they create an open season for criminals?
They know that all they have to do is not stop for us and drive recklessly to get away, and we can't pursue them.
Car thefts are booming, leaving law-abiding citizens stranded and steaming mad.
Call the cops. I gotta call them. We gotta call them.
We're the ones that have to stand in front of them and say, I'm sorry, we can't do anything.
As they learn about the new laws the hard way.
Come on now, legislature, do better than this. This needs to change, and they need to go to jail.
Has the victim's voice been lost?
The sheriff's deputies actually were a little hesitant for me to go immediately to the emergency room because they wouldn't have been able to hold him without positive ID.
And can we strike a balance before things spiral out of control?
You know, people are going to start arming themselves and they're going to take the law in their own hands.
Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm David Rose and welcome to the debut of the Spotlight. I've been working the crime beat here since 2008, giving a voice to victims and helping you get justice. But I have never seen things as bad as they are right now. Just scroll through your Facebook page, you'll see police departments asking for your help to identify suspects, and post after post from car theft victims pleading for you to help them find their vehicle. Just take a look at the latest numbers from the Puget Sound Auto Theft Task Force. 1,381 vehicles stolen just last month in King County, up from 1,174 in November. In Pierce County, 915 vehicles stolen in December, up from 800 in November. And that's more than double during the same period in 2020. The suspects know officers are powerless to stop them because of new laws enacted last year. All they have to do is refuse to pull over for a traffic stop, which left one victim in Lakewood in disbelief.
I've got the ADT app, and so it went off and I pulled the cameras, and that's when I could see somebody running through the building. So I called the police. Right over here is where they made entry. Once they got to the board, they took every single set of keys off of it. This is almost $1 million worth of inventory was in these criminals' pockets driving down the road. And I'm learning about probable cause as they're in our stolen company van at 2 o'clock in the morning with keys in their pockets that they've stolen. It is a big white cargo style van, and it's got the Rolf's German Eagle emblems and logos all over it. The whole thing is wrapped. So you could hear the officers talking on their radios. And I'm sitting there and I'm doing the inventory, and I was like, oh, yay, right? Woo, they got him. Right? Whew, we can breathe. They're going to get the keys back. It's going to be okay. This was just a terrible experience. No. Officers looked at me and said, we've got eyes on them, but if they take off, we have to let them go. And in that moment, I felt really frustrated that I didn't understand, what do you mean? It's a company van and they've got pockets full of our customers' keys, and you're the law.
How frustrating is that for you to have to look at the people here and tell them we had to let your stolen van go?
It's beyond frustrating, and that's one of the things that, you know, I talk about a voice missing from Olympia, and that's their voice, the victims of crime, who, you know, many in Olympia don't have to look at when they're passing these laws. We do. We're the ones that have to stand in front of them and say, I'm sorry, we can't do anything. That's frustrating and disheartening, and you know, not why any of us got into law enforcement.
What changed for you when the new laws went into effect last year?
So there was a few things that really impacted how we can do things, and one was certainly the law limiting when we can and can't pursue somebody in a vehicle. A lot of that comes back to one, the difference between reasonable suspicion and probable cause, but also a defined list of crimes that was given to us that we can pursue for, and anything outside of that list we could not.
Do you feel like the change in the law that criminals know you're not going to chase them if they take off and run that red light in that stolen vehicle?
It used to be, when an officer would see a stolen car, even if they fled and got away, they would dump that stolen car and get away from it as quickly as they can. Now, we're seeing the same stolen car being driven around in traffic like it's a commuter vehicle for days on end, sometimes weeks on end. And that's definitely part of it, because they know that all they have to do is not stop for us and drive recklessly to get away, and we can't pursue them.
I know what it feels like to have my vehicle stolen, and it is a heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, empty feeling. But I can't imagine what it would be like to know my car was then used in another crime. Is that a big concern for law enforcement, that these cars aren't just being used for transportation, but they can be used in serious felonies as well?
Oh, they can be used for anything, and we do see that. What we're seeing a lot now is they're being used for retail theft, organized retail theft. They'll go to stores and clear off a shelf, and when we get the license plate of the car that they got into, a lot of times it's a stolen car. But they can be used for any number of things from the time they're stolen until the time they're recovered.
Yeah.
And most of them not good.
Well, I look back at the case where the Federal Way police officer was shot in Puyallup while he was out for a jog. Those suspects were in a stolen truck. You look at the most recent case, we had a horrendous case of the homicide of the 12-year-old girl that was killed in Pierce County. That truck was stolen. So stolen vehicles are a huge problem right now. Is the law making it easier for these criminals to get away?
Yeah, and that's, I go back to, it's just a stolen car unless it's your car, or unless you're the one that was victimized by the thief in some other way. One of the other big changes was when we can use force. And again, that comes back to some of the differences between reasonable suspicion and probable cause. And it was mandated that we can only use force when there's probable cause.
How do you develop probable cause on a suspect?
Well, so that one way to look at it is reasonable suspicion is discovered, probable cause is developed. So reasonable suspicion is just that, reasonable suspicion. You have, in proximity to the location of the crime, you have a description that matches the suspect in the crime, maybe carrying something or driving something that was used in the crime. All these things that would lead a reasonable person to suspect that this person might have had something to do with a particular crime. Now, probable cause takes time to develop. You maybe detain somebody based on that reasonable suspicion, and then you do follow. You have witnesses come and try and identify them. You maybe write a search warrant or interview the person and just do more of an investigation till you get to that point of probable cause, which is the threshold for an actual arrest. Up until now, reasonable suspicion was that was the threshold for physical detention, and then you worked further till you got to probable cause, and that was arrest. They call them Terry stops, but those are detentions, investigative detentions based on reasonable suspicion. That's what a Terry stop is, and they allow for a use of force to overcome somebody's physical resistance to detain them. Whether it's grabbing somebody's arm and to keep them from walking away, or using an arm bar, or anything to overcome physical resistance to a lawful command.
So you see a suspect, you think he's the suspect, you don't have enough for probable cause on that, but you cannot even detain them at the scene. They can say, no way, dude, sayonara, I'm out of here.
We can tell them to stop, but yeah, if they keep on walking, we can't physically grab them and detain them to overcome their resistance or their attempts to walk away.
Critics of law enforcement in support of the legislation say that this law is needed to protect people of color, from being harassed or arrested unreasonably.
Well, I would say that there is always room for improvement, and especially to create more trust and transparency in the law and in law enforcement. But you have to go about that in a meaningful way that doesn't damage public safety. And I think that's possible. I just don't think we got there last year in that legislative session.
Lawmakers passed 3 bills in Olympia in April of 2021. Supporters say those new laws are necessary to protect people from police brutality and harassment. For an in-depth look at what exactly is in the new laws as they're written, we turn now to our political reporter, Matt Markovich.
Don't tell me to relax when you're on top of me!
Protests following the death of George Floyd prompted state lawmakers to pass several police reforms to curb what some said were overreaches of police powers. A year ago, the democratically led House and Senate changed how police do their job. House Bill 1310 was intended to address complaints of excessive use of force and required officers to act with reasonable care when carrying out their duties, including using de-escalation tactics and alternatives to deadly force. House Bill 1054 changed police tactics, such as a law enforcement agency may not acquire or use any military equipment, and a peace officer may not engage in a vehicular pursuit, except under specific circumstances.
And that has really clearly made our communities less safe and the law enforcement community's job nearly impossible.
Suspects quickly figured out they could simply walk away after being caught by police.
I think the word's gotten out on the street that you can just walk away, you can just run away, and the police cannot do anything about it. And that's true.
And that's coming from Representative Roger Goodman, the powerful House Public Safety Committee chairman, because nearly every police-related bill must pass through his committee first, and he decides what bills get a hearing.
The laws that we passed needed a little bit of refinement and clarification.
Republicans say that's an understatement.
Law enforcement were pleading with the legislature to define what they meant.
In a letter to Goodman, the state attorney general says, "We strongly urge the legislature to clarify its intent regarding questions about these bills." Now there's a bipartisan effort to fix these bills many police agencies say are preventing them from doing their job. Arguably, restrictions on the use of force passed last year is the number one fix.
The way we've written the law, that police cannot put handcuffs on people while they're detaining them or while they're merely questioning them. Obviously, you can put handcuffs on someone after you've arrested them.
I want to make an arrest.
Right now, police cannot use physical force to prevent a person from simply walking away after being detained by police. A proposed fix would restore an officer's ability to use force to do that, and there are still questions.
And David, that's what police are asking for. They just want some clarity in these fixes in these laws.
Well, officers are concerned they're going to get jammed up in civil court over this, Matt. So that's why they think the law is too murky. Do you think we'll get some of that clarification this legislative session?
I don't think there will be, because the legislators are actually predicting that these laws, many of these laws they're trying to pass, if they get to the governor's desk and he signs them, will end up in the courts and will also end up in some of the state Supreme Court. And that's going to be the ultimate clarity, but that's going to take some time. So what the police officers want is clarity now, and I really don't think that's going to happen right away.
There are a lot of victims out there with a very loud voice about their opinions. Do the legislators feel any pressure from the public to make some changes?
They do, and they've responded to that. They've said they've heard from people across the state about how murky these laws are, and that's why they are trying to pass these fixes. But whether or not it satisfies the police officers that these fixes are, or is it just window dressing? It's just lip service that they're going through the motions. That's to be determined.
Fox 13's political reporter Matt Markovich, thanks so much. We'll see you again soon. Well, I talked in depth with a key sponsor of the bills that became law, who is now considering rolling back some of the reforms the police say have left them powerless.
When did you realize or start to get feedback that maybe it had gone too far?
Really, I mean, the day after the laws went into effect.
Tonight, one of the co-sponsors of the legislation that police say is tying their hands now says that some of the new laws need clarification. I talked at length with State Representative Jesse Johnson from Federal Way on how these bills have impacted victims.
This was a video from a story we did last week with a car theft victim in Lakewood, and she specifically mentions legislators.
Are you serious?
The car stolen in the video is Sheila Davenport's. She just got it in July. She watched with her own eyes as it sped away from her home.
Call the cops. I gotta call them. We gotta call them.
You're gonna let a murderer do the same? No, you're not. A thief is a thief, and until you stop that thief, he or she is gonna continue to do the same thing. Come on now, legislatures, do better than this. This needs to change, and they need to go to jail because they are breaking the law.
I believe what she's saying. I mean, I wholeheartedly believe the average person would say if their car was stolen in front of your eyes, go after that person. I do think context matters as well. If that car was stolen in 2 p.m., say, and you had a school bus around, kids around, I would say don't pursue. And I wouldn't want them to pursue my vehicle if that was the case. But I do think in this situation, it appears it's at night. There's not really any cars on the road. They should have the ability to pursue.
What was your initial reason for wanting to change the policing laws?
A lot of it came from what we heard from community following the murder of George Floyd and locally with Manny Ellis. Our goal really was to increase accountability, reduce police violence, and also have de-escalation the center of police work.
When did you realize or start to get feedback that maybe it had gone too far?
Really, I mean, the day after the laws went into effect, July 26th, there was a story in Kent. And I think, from that moment, the last 6 months, we've been hearing similar stories. And, although I think a lot of the violence that's occurring, it dates back pre the laws. I mean, a lot of it is a lot of different reasons. But I think we started hearing about some of the officer inability to do their job the day after the laws went into effect. And that's why we're responding and addressing.
The big discussion now is reasonable suspicion and probable cause. So if this new law is confusing enough that trained lawyers with the Attorney General's office can't quite figure it out, how are police on the street supposed to know exactly what they're supposed to do?
I agree. I mean, that's part of the problem, David. I think that it highlights, the AGO's opinion highlights the complexity of what law enforcement advisors and legal experts have to deal with in terms of policy. And, to be honest, a lot of these policies that were put in place years ago, Terry versus Ohio in 1968, left a lot of gray area. I mean, it says in Terry versus Ohio that an officer can detain based on reasonable circumstances. And what is reasonable? I mean, there's an officer's judgment. There could be another person's judgment or idea of what reasonable is. And so we were trying to first put a reasonable care standard in place that was well defined, which I think will still exist, but also get past the threshold of, do the officers have enough evidence? Are they asking questions before using force? I do think we swung the pendulum a little too far in terms of not allowing force to even detain for especially serious violent crimes, but I think that the intent behind it was to reduce this confusion as to whether an officer should be able to use force in whatever circumstance they arrive to.
In tweaking the language on reasonable suspicion and probable cause,
Yeah.
what are some of the things in your current bill or in, as you talked about that pendulum, to sort of redefine that? Or is it just switching it back to reasonable suspicion?
Well, what we did, we identified the problem, which was people fleeing the Terry stop. So you have an investigative detention, the officer shows up and someone is being questioned, they literally just start walking away. And the officer right now, other than trying to corner them or, all they have the power of is their voice to say, hey, stop, try to continue the investigation. But if they start running away or leaving or jumping in a car, the officer can't do anything about it, is what we're hearing for the last 6 months. And of course, these problems have existed a long time, but typically officers would still go after that suspect. Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to address that part. It's not really the definition. We don't really want to get into that. But what we say is stopping someone from fleeing an investigative detention based on reasonable suspicion. The officers can use, of course, reasonable force, and we're defining force as well. So we're trying to at least address that. And we'll see how that plays out. I mean, a lot of major systemic reform, it takes years to figure this stuff out. And so I think we're probably going to have to revisit a lot of this in the future. I don't think this is the end in 2022.
Will you be able to get the support of your fellow Democrats to swing this pendulum back just a little bit?
It's going to be tough. I think that, we have a wide range of beliefs and values within our caucus. I think everyone does want the community to all be safe, but we also have people that have their own interests in their community. We have, the families that have lost someone at the hands of police. And even though a lot of the tenets of 1310 will still remain, we'll still have de-escalation, we'll still have less lethal enforcement of the law, we'll still have, them looking at the totality of the circumstances before engaging, but it's about the rules of engagement once they get to the crime. And by going back for this reasonable suspicion, probable cause threshold, I think it's going to be a little bit better for the ultimate policy, but it's going to be hard to convince people about that, I'll be honest.
What's the biggest thing you've learned in the last year?
I've learned about the fact that we all have some level of bias. I think bias exists in society, and it's just reflected in professions like policing, like legislating. I will admit, I believe I do have a bias towards police. I had a horrific incident where, when I was 5 years old, my dad was stopped on 520 Bridge for reasonable suspicion for a stolen vehicle. He was just driving his own vehicle to work. They pulled him out, guns drawn. I'm looking at it from the window. And one wrong move, and I probably wouldn't have had a dad, and that could have changed the entire trajectory of my life. And that was on false, mistaken identity. I think that those type of stories exist in the majority of Black and brown people in our communities, but we still have to realize that we have to be consistent. And I think if we're saying that we want crime and crime down, but we also want accountability for police, we also need to have accountability for everyone. So if someone does a crime, they should be held accountable for that. And I think that's what I'm learning in the last year, is that these crimes are still occurring. Unfortunately, we're kind of in this perfect storm of a pandemic where you have a lot of socioeconomic related crime. You have people willing to take these unfortunate risks. And then we also passed legislation that, tried to, again, hold police accountable and reduce police violence, but may have unintentionally also hampered police's ability to do their job. So I think we need to look at all of that, and that's what we're doing this year.
How do we improve police and community relations?
Well, looking at the history of it, I was really glad to see. I went to the police academy training, and shout out to Officer Ken Westfall in Lacey. He's the trainer there. He did a course called History of Race and Policing, and he talked about how policing was originally slave patrols and that whole history for the last 200 years. And I think it's really important for everyone to understand that that's the perspective that a lot of people identify with police. And so we have to bring people along. We have to have police not just having, coffee with the cop or this or that. We need to go to the community and also teach them about their rights. I've talked with our police here in Federal Way about an idea to go into the schools and do Know Your Rights classes for youth. Because having police teaching youth about how to stay out of the system and not get involved in a criminal sort of thing would be powerful as compared to someone else. If police were telling you, we don't want you here to have to deal with us, I think that would be really cool. So I think we have to have more of those opportunities for engagement with our police. And, I also think the community has to understand they have a job to do, and that job may require sometimes using force or different things we may not like, as long as it's reasonable, not excessive. I think what we saw on the national level with George Floyd was just egregious. But I don't think that's the everyday officer. I believe the vast majority of officers are there for the right reasons, they're doing their job for the right reasons. And the community has to understand that perspective as well. So it's just understanding one another, which is hard to do, I believe, in a highly polarized, kind of irrational time right now with social media and that sort of thing. But I hope that we can get there.
Up next, an unhinged man smashes his way into a home in the middle of the night, violently attacks a father defending his family, and then disappears. But instead of sending the victim to the hospital, deputies ask him to hang around.
Evidently, the current rules are they wouldn't have been able to hold him without positive ID.
What the new King County Sheriff says about policing in 2022. Well, here's a nightmare scenario. It's 5 a.m. You wake up to the sound of breaking glass, and you find an intruder inside your house.
I was armed with my underwear, so I decided the best thing to do was to try to talk him out of the house.
Problem was, this guy wasn't there for a chat, and things almost turned deadly in an instant.
When the guy hit me, I don't know, I thought I was going to get knocked out because there's like blood across my eye, and then when he cut me, I kind of thought I was going to die right there.
It all started the morning of December 12th when a deputy was flagged down about a rollover accident involving this stolen white Ford truck abandoned on Northeast 124th Way. A few minutes later, Andy Chakraborty called 911 after he woke to the sound of breaking glass and found a man in his hallway.
And I said, "Who are you? What are you doing in my house?"
Detectives believe the suspect that crashed the stolen truck had then shattered the glass on Andy's French door. He was armed with a fireplace poker.
He said, "I need my car keys." And I asked him, "Well, why would your car keys be in my house?" And he said, "Well, this is my house."
Andy says he tried to calmly talk the man into leaving. It didn't work.
He then grabbed his poker thing that he used, hit me, and you can actually still see the scar. And it was bleeding like anything, as you figure, with a scalp wound. And then I immediately raised my hand, and you can see the big gash where he got me with one of those little clicky knives.
He was able to wrestle the poker away from the suspect and hit him with it.
I figured all I can do is want it more than he does, because my wife and 2 little boys were asleep.
That's when the guy took off running. Minutes later, detectives say this Ring camera video shows the suspect trying to get a nearby homeowner to open the door.
Me. Daniel?
He left, but multiple 911 calls started coming in about car prowls and vehicle thefts. Instead of taking Mr. Chakraborty to the hospital, deputies asked him to wait while they searched for the suspect who'd broken into his home.
Evidently, the current rules are they wouldn't have been able to hold him without like a positive ID. So again, I'm not a public policy expert, but maybe we need to think about how we make the sheriff's deputies' lives a little bit easier to hold somebody when they have a reasonable suspicion without me having to be there, you know, like covered in blood making an ID.
This isn't shoplifting or a stolen vehicle that we're talking about. That's a man assaulted in his own home, gushing blood from wounds to his head, arms, and his body. As violent as crime gets. And deputies tell him they need him to stay there so they can establish probable cause if they find the suspect so they can actually arrest him. Which brings us back to whether victims of crime have been overlooked in all the discussions on policing. It's one of the topics I discussed in a wide-ranging interview with King County's new sheriff, Patty Cole-Tendall. Hear from this guy, as we just did, who's standing there bleeding at a crime scene, waiting to see if they bring a suspect back so he can be arrested because of the change in the laws last year, meaning reasonable suspicion isn't enough anymore and you have to have probable cause. Somewhere in there, do you think that the citizen, the victim, has been lost in the conversation?
I think what we need to do is a better job of educating the public about what are our limitations, what are our abilities, and what are our limitations. I think that people mainly get their education about law enforcement on TV, watching the shows on TV. And the shows that they see aren't the Washington laws, right? So CSI or whatever it might be. So I think if we can help the public understand, okay, here are the laws changed, and this is what it means. And, you know, as you pointed out, until somebody's the victim, you don't really think about these things as an individual, as just a resident. But when somebody breaks into your house or attacks you or takes your car, now it is personal. But if we can help folks understand, so, you know, maybe they can talk to their own legislators and help to change laws if they feel that that is appropriate.
What are your hopes from the legislative session right now when it comes to policing in King County over the next 10 years?
I think with the what's before them, some clarity around what does use of force mean, what is certain definitions, getting clarity around that. And also, I think moving the pendulum back somewhat. I wouldn't say all the way back, but back where it's reasonable, right? And that my officers, my deputies can still do their work. Victims, like you talked about, understand what the law provides for now so that they don't have these, I would say, unrealistic expectations about what we can do and how it used to be. So I think clarity is really, really important.
What reaction are you getting in your personal life to being first black sheriff, first woman of color sheriff in King County? I mean, it's historic.
It is, and you know, it's not lost on me that it is historic, and I've been getting some great comments. I even got a card from somebody, I don't know who the person is, just somebody from the public, who sent me a card to say how important it was for them that they felt, you know, that the executive appointed a woman of color in this role first time ever. That there is a woman of color, that there's anybody of color in the role of sheriff for King County. So personally, you know, it means a lot to me. I mean, my father is from Alabama. He grew up in the time of segregation, and, you know, even for him, he's like, wow, you know. So, but for me, I feel like it means something, and so I take this very seriously, and that's why I definitely want to leave, even for the short period of time, I want to leave it better than when I came into this role and set the table for success.
What programs are you working on now to push the department forward over the next year or two?
So one that I think is really, really important that we need to do, and it's the law, is the duty to intervene. So we are working to become an ABLE certified organization. ABLE stands for Active Bystander for Law Enforcement. What that means is this: bystandership for law enforcement. We need to teach our deputies how to intervene. Well, if we talk about George Floyd and those 3 police officers,
Yeah, their trial is going on right now.
Who watched that happen.
Are you really a firefighter?
Yes, I am from Minneapolis.
Okay, then get on the sidewalk.
You show me his post.
They didn't know how to intervene. And wouldn't it have been a better outcome if they knew how to intervene and they had intervened? I want to make sure that every single deputy here at the King County Sheriff's Office has that training. Something as simple as Abel has a pen and a deputy just pointing to the pen, which would remind the other deputy who's in the moment, hey, I need to slow down, I need to back up. Because, you know, often these things happen very quickly. But if we haven't trained our folks how to do something differently, they're going to do, you know, they're human beings. They're going to do what comes to them. But the active bystandership for law enforcement not only helps the deputies, but it helps the community. So I also think having a component where we offer training to the community so they know what officers have been trained to do. And so going back to the George Floyd case, if those officers had been trained and the community knew what the obligations were, potentially there would have been a better outcome, a different outcome. At least George Floyd wouldn't have been killed.
Doesn't matter whether it's the rookie or one of the more seasoned.
That's right. It doesn't matter who it is.
Up next, we're giving you a look at how deputies are taught to operate under the new laws. We are heading to the academy to learn de-escalation techniques.
Really what this comes down to is just talking to people like people.
Welcome back to On the Record. We have had some really enlightening conversations tonight on the new policing laws. And now we're showing you how deputies are training to de-escalate volatile situations. Photojournalist Michael Driver takes us to the Criminal Justice Training Center for a class taught by Deputy Jace Hawk.
I want to make sure that we make this very clear. This is something that we do when it is safe and feasible, not if it's unsafe. De-escalation, very simple, right? We're using tools, tactics, and techniques to gain voluntary compliance.
You believe in Jesus Christ, brother? Don't do it. Don't do it.
Then shoot me!
No, don't do it.
Give that space that he gave. There's a car between them. That car is cover. It's shielding. It's distance that he has now. These pre-BLEA students start out going through weeks and weeks and weeks of this stuff. Really what this comes down to is just talking to people like people, to de-escalate people, to talk to people before using force if it's safe to do so. Distance is going to be determined by the type of call that you go to. Then that's what we train them to do.
So I am going to be playing a subject in crisis.
We have several callers calling in of a female who appears to be crying upset, and they want somebody to stop by and check her out and make sure everything's okay.
Oh.
These scenes kind of help take the classroom portion of this and put this into a real world situations.
My dog died, you see. I'm a really terrible owner and I don't think I want to continue.
Sorry to hear that. What kind of dog was she?
If for a new cop to come through, I'll tell them every single call you go on, you are going to be relating to people. That's what we do. Then since dog also can be her trigger, you started asking about her family, right? Let's go back to that really quick and just see if we can find something better to talk about.
It doesn't seem like life's worth going on with when I don't have anything to live for, really.
It sounds like you have a niece and nephew that you care about.
Ultimately, the outcome of a lot of these calls is dictated by the person we're contacting. We cannot control what people do.
What kind of role model would I be if I quit?
Awesome job, right? You came up with a compromise with her, right? But we will try everything on our end to make a favorable outcome for that. Let's just have her push that knife away and then bring her to us.
Police work is not just about law enforcement. A huge part of police work is community service.
How's it going?
Most of us that are in this career are in it because we want to help people. It's the most serious relationship I've ever been in.
So you're going through a hard time right now, something that really nobody should have to go through.
This job is not necessarily jumping over fences and chasing bad guys all day long. It happens. It definitely happens.
My name's Ty. What's your name?
But when you start realizing this job, that the bulk of this is working with people and helping people.
There's times where we deal with crime and stressful situations. You need to be brave and tactical, but you really, more than anything else, need to be human. Or can I leave? Because
No, you're absolutely free to go.
I'm gonna go.
And that training is so crucial because the more officers do it in practice, the more it becomes second nature when they're in the field. And coming up, the Spotlight makes a house call, gets a history lesson, and a bit of a perspective from a woman who grew up hating police and is now trying to bridge the gap with communities of color. One of the best things you can do when faced with a complicated or confusing issue is ask an elder what they think. Victoria Beach has lived in Seattle her entire life. She watched as the city and the Central District underwent drastic changes. And in many ways, Victoria says she's changed as well, including how she thinks about police. One of our favorite things about Miss Beach is that she calls it like she sees it, and she is not shy to share what's on her mind.
But I'm going to have to go with the side of not being able to stop, them, because look, it's a lot of racial profiling. And if that's going to save a life, I'm okay with it. But on the other hand, I can't stand knowing that people are getting away with crimes, But the police departments just have their own officers to blame for the laws, If they held them accountable, we wouldn't have to make these decisions. I don't know. What I'm hoping is with some of these laws that they can be rewritten and have the community's input. Victoria Beach and I chair the African American Community Advisory Council. Yeah, I was born and raised here in the Central District, 5 generations. I'm the 3rd generation. I've lived here all my life, and I still live in the Central District. There was domestic violence in my home, and so I witnessed my dad getting beat up pretty bad by police, and that was my first interaction that I remember with police. So I didn't like them, seeing my dad with a bloody nose, black eye that was caused by somebody that should have shown up to help. And it just continued. Early on, I never really had any great experience with police. I had my twin sister beat up, my nephew beat up. I was called the N-word when I was 17, not once, over and over by SPD. I have a daughter who's 26, and when she was 5, she was in a situation where it was reported there was a stolen car. It was actually big-time racial profiling. Long story short, everybody had to get out the car while they're yelling that there's a 5-year-old in the car to the police. But when everybody was out, she was the last one out, and 5 years old with her hands in the air and 2 guns pointed at her. And even being pulled over, I never had an officer treat me with any respect, ever. And I would like to be pulled over now just to see how I would be treated if things have changed. I hear they haven't.
SPD is going to have to pay in the end.
Beating my dad up, there's no way they would have been in trouble if my dad would have complained. That was just how it was back in the day. The thing that's different now is people aren't going to be quiet about it. And you're going to be held accountable. And you have no one to blame but your fellow officers. If there weren't videos,
I can't breathe. What do you want? I can breathe.
I think it would continue. Because it continues with video. The only thing that's going to change if officers hold other officers accountable. And they should be able to do that without being labeled or losing their jobs. Growing up, nothing could have changed my mind against them. What changed my mind against them, I had so much anger, and I think it ate at me. And I started meeting officers, being a block watch captain, and I thought, not all of them are bad, because some of them agree with everything I'm saying about them. They agree, and so I just thought I need to dig in deeper, and I did. And there are a lot of great officers out there, a lot. But on the sad side to that, most of the ones that I thought so highly of have left and are leaving. I don't love the police. I do want to hold them accountable. It makes me sick when an African American is murdered, or even beat up or whatever, or, you know, dismissed. We're not going to have it. And I'm right there fighting, right there with you. You know, I'm not going to tolerate it, but my style is different. I want to be heard. I don't want to come off as some militant, crazy person. I believe in protesting and marching, but I'm not going to join the fools that wanted to burn our city down. In the precinct, that precinct was put there by City Council member Sam Smith, African American man. He put that there. So all the white kids that were burning and everything, that should be an insult to the black community, you know? People have had it. In every conversation, every day, everybody's upset about it. It's a free-for-all. You know, I always say, if you want to commit a crime and get away with it, move to Seattle. It's a free-for-all. You can do whatever you want. Hopefully with our new elected officials, it's going to stop. I can go into a store almost every day and witness somebody stealing. And there was one woman, and I said, you need to put it back. The police are going to come. I'm going to call. And she goes, they're not going to show up. And she goes, and if they do, I won't be in trouble. And you're right. They know there aren't enough police to show up. They know that there aren't enough police to patrol and see what's going on. All these groups that were calling for defunding and this and that, and that we can step up and we'll do it. Where are you? Why aren't you out there? You know, you didn't want SPD. You were going to fill that role. You're not around, you know? So now we don't have either one. All I want to do and why I took this position is I want to heal my city. And part of that is holding police accountable. But I'm not going to be, I have a different style. I'm not going to shout and scream. I want to come together where we can sit and have an adult conversation and make progress. And I think we could have made a difference with George Floyd, but it was taken off of that. It was taken, you know, it's put on the riots and everything else. But I think this was a time in history where his murder woke the world up. And, but Seattle wasn't a part of that. And that kills me more than anything.
Powerful words from a very wise woman. Victoria Beach is also a living example of how people's opinions can change through experience and conversation. That's something we all need more of. Well, where is your car right now, and how safe is it? Advice to make your ride less attractive to car prowlers and thieves, and easier to retrieve if they do steal it.
Like, he broke the tempered glass in my French door. By the way, my public service message is get a glass break sensor for your door.
Well, he learned the hard way about the steps needed to protect his home, and something most people don't think of, putting a motion sensor on a glass door. When it comes to taking steps to protect your personal safety and your belongings, it is more important now than ever. As we've shown you tonight, it's open season for car thieves. And once they get your vehicle off your property, well, good luck getting it back. And that's why you want to make sure that your car is harder and takes longer to steal than the one next to it. We have some advice from a pro on how to do that. Car Toys in Bellevue used to be a place where people would go for a bumpin' set of speakers. These days, most customers aren't looking for a sound system, they want security.
Again, it comes down to that deterrence factor where if it's too hard, they're not going to do it.
Augustus Mordaunt is the manager here. He says his best-selling items make it significantly harder or riskier for crooks looking to steal a car. Whether it's a specialized car alarm that can detect the thief attempting to steal parts like a catalytic converter, or this little gizmo called a kill switch.
Just once you turn your key, nothing will happen. Your starter won't move. So your car, everything will still be on except the car. The engine won't turn on. So it's one of our better ways of preventing it, definitely.
Kill switches are easy to get installed and definitely on the lower end of the price spectrum for security devices. Make sure you have it put in a place that's not easy to spot for a criminal whose adrenaline is pumping as they're sitting in your driver's seat trying to make off with your ride. Something like a secretly hidden GPS could set you back $1,000 or more, but Mordaunt says many customers feel it's worth it.
It's a sense of security to have that, just know where your car is. Yeah, that's definitely something we do a lot of.
And he points out it's a lot cheaper than buying a new car, something more people are considering as theft rates rise. And as we've discussed, police are unlikely to get your car back in a pursuit, meaning they'll need to find it once it's parked.
When all you can do is deter them.
Mordaunt says thieves looking to steal vehicles aren't usually looking for a challenge. Having extra security measures could make them move on and leave yours alone. And remember, as tempting as it may be at the time, never take the law into your own hands. People that steal cars, they are dangerous and they are desperate. And as much as it pains you to be without your vehicle, the cost, the anger, the frustration, it's just not worth getting shot over. So just take precautions. Make sure you keep it from being stolen in the first place. If you feel compelled about everything you've seen tonight on the Spotlight, ask your legislators to hear your voice. Make sure you write your representatives. That's all the time we have for tonight. We'll be shining the spotlight on more issues next week. Until then, keep safe and be smart.